Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you here with us today for episode 97 of This Is CDR. This Is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to explore the range of carbon removal solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed, and to contextualize them for policy proposals OpenAir seeks to advance at every level of government here in the US, as well as in subnational and national jurisdictions globally. We also, on the program, cover carbon market, ecosystem, environmental justice, responsible deployment, MRV, and ecosystem level issues as well, in addition to this actual solution level content. My name's Toby Bryce, based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work on policy and market development with OpenAir. If you haven't done so already, please say hello in the chat, introduce yourself, tell us where you're zooming in from and your affiliation if you would like, and also make sure to direct that message to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, so everyone can hear from you. Quick background on OpenAir, if you're not familiar with us, we're a distributed all-volunteer network dedicated to the responsible advancement of CDR. We work together on shared open source projects that we call missions in the areas of policy, activist market development, innovation, and communications. Here's a page from our website. There's a page that we'll put a link to in the chat, and you can sort of link through via these tiles to all of our different projects, see the kinds of things we're working on. We'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. Again, we're open source. People can come in, join a project, start a new project, and love to have you be a part of what we're doing. And again, we'll put a link in the chat to a form that you can fill out to join our group. Two projects that we have going on right now are two state-level CDR policies in the US, and they're really important and innovative, and they're also both advancing. There's one in Massachusetts called the CDRLA, which is a state-level CDR procurement policy, S2096. And in California, we have a bill called SB 308, apologies for the acronyms, but it's the CDR Market Development Act, which is a state-level, super innovative negative emissions compliance market. If you live in either of those states, we need as many CDR advocates as possible, citizen advocates, to reach out to your local rep. So please reach out to us, and if you're willing to help, and we'd love to get you involved in both of those efforts. As always, we want to define our terms. This is a definition of CDR from a great resource called the CDR Primer that we'll put a link to in the chat if you want to learn about the sort of like large baseline of carbon removal. It's essentially the same definition that the IPCC uses, so we think it's a good one to work with. Purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in long-lived products. Again, as always, whenever we talk about CDR and before every time we start this program, we just need to clearly state up front that CDR is in no way, shape, or form any sort of substitute for rapid decarbonization of the global economy. We need to reduce global greenhouse emissions as quickly and as completely as possible, full stop. That is 90+% of our climate work. It is our highest priority climate work. Without significant deep emissions cuts, CDR will not get us nearly to where we need to be. That said, there's clear scientific consensus that CDR is an essential climate solution alongside these rapid and deep emissions cuts, and that we are going to need CDR at massive scale by mid-century, multi-gigaton scale, that's billions of tons a year, in order to neutralize the emissions that we can't eliminate in a climate relevant time frame so that we can reach net zero. So that's just a scientific fact. We need billions of tons of CDR. We need to start working on it now. Our current scale is tens, hundreds of kilotons, thousands of tons, depending on what we're counting and how we're measuring it. So we need to leap several orders of magnitude between now and 2050 to meet our climate goals. The other reason we need CDR is in the second half of the century, after we're hopefully at net zero, there are going to be trillions of tons of anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere. We're already seeing that our climate is in an increasingly dangerous state, and we're going to need the ability to draw down CO2 from the atmosphere to restore our climate to a safer and healthier state. So those are kind of the two reasons we need CDR: to get to net zero, to neutralize residual emissions, and then the second half of the century to remove legacy emissions from the atmosphere. That's why we're here. That's why we do the work we do. Super excited to hand it over to my colleague, Megha Raghavan, who's going to say hello, introduce herself, and talk about run of show, and then introduce today's presenters.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megha. I'm also an OpenAir member based in London, and I work on policy and market development as well. So just as a quick housekeeping note, as usual, we're going to start with a short presentation from Ted and Teresa, followed by a few prepared questions, and then we'll go into moderated audience Q&A. So please do type any questions you have for our presenters into the Q&A box as we go along. It's separate from the chat box, so just make sure you find the right one so we can organize and manage those questions. We're also recording the event, so we'll post it on OpenAir's website and YouTube channel, and we'll also be sending it out to everyone who registered. Okay, this week we're very pleased to welcome Teresa Hartmann and Ted Christie-Miller from BeZero Carbon to present and discuss the company's work as a carbon ratings agency and how independent, risk-based, project-level ratings can help to build the market trust necessary to scale high-quality CDR. Teresa Hartmann is the Chief Ratings Officer at BeZero Carbon. She has extensive experience in scaling carbon market development, transparency, and integrity. Before joining BeZero, she led market formation for the ICVCM and helped to develop the core carbon principles. Teresa also held roles at WEF, UNEP, and a national park in Africa, as well as authored key reports on nature and climate finance, such as WEF's Nature and Net Zero report. Ted Christie-Miller is the Director of Carbon Removal at BeZero Carbon, a global carbon rating agency. He joined BeZero in October 2021, and prior to that, he founded and led the bipartisan Getting to Zero climate policy program at the think tank Onward. Ted regularly writes in the national media on the topic of climate and carbon markets, and he's a regular speaker at carbon events around the world. So both of you, whenever you're ready, please come on, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for the intros. Great to be here today with a removals focused crowd. I have to admit, I probably speak to the tree people much more than the removals people, but here we are. This is exciting. Let me pull up a couple of slides. I'm basically going to walk you through ratings, right? As in, like, what does BeZero do? Why do you need a rating? What does it do? And then I'm going to hand over to Ted, who works on removals day in, day out. So he's really going to walk you through what we do in the CDR space. But yeah, very quickly, right? Why credits and why ratings on these credits? So I think we all understand, I'm just going to echo what Toby just said, right? Like, we need to get to net zero, and investing in climate projects is the best way we have to do that, right? So it's both and. It's like we need to accelerate a transition to net zero, which means we need to actually invest in places where emission reductions are the most efficient and effective, right? So where do we get the biggest bang for our buck? And can we use markets to actually invest a dollar spent to result in the largest, fastest, quickest, most impactful emission reductions that we can? So we're accelerating the transition to net zero. At the same time, and this is where the removals come in, how do we actually start scaling up a removals pipeline today, right? As in, like, we know that we're going to need tons and tons and tons of removals in the second half of the century. So how do we use this half of the century to actually drive down costs for removals and make sure that removals are available at scale? So this is why markets, and that is why credits, right? Which I think we all understand in this space. And then the question that we keep getting asked as a ratings agency is where to put our money, right? So it's either buyers who are looking to retire credit, or it's investors who are looking to develop projects. But it's really that question of, like, where is the best place to invest so that we see the highest climate impacts and that we have real durable emission reductions or removals resulting from that. So that's basically what we do as a ratings agency, right? So we're out there providing independent risk-based project assessments. So we look at any type of climate project that can generate a credit. So we go along the entire breadth. So everything from nature-based solutions to tech avoidance, right? Energy, industry, waste, engineered removals, so the whole breadth. And we really look at the projects in their individual context, right? So we don't just look at the standard, we don't just look at the methodology, we look at the actual project implementation, just to recognize that, all projects carry risk. We can give you a better understanding of what that risk distribution looks like for your specific project within that project type. And then we really complement some of the market labels that are out there, right? So things might be CORSIA eligible, CCP eligible, Article 6 adjusted, and so on. But really what we do is to provide that one step deeper analysis of what's happening in this project. And the idea is obviously very much to drive demand and investor money into high quality projects that are being developed or on the market today. So how do ratings help our partners and the project landscape that's out there? We take an analytical approach, right? So we have analysts actually sitting there reviewing data, looking at geoscience, supported by geoscientists, and we will look at everything from carbon accounting to additionality to permanence. And where we're looking at projects that are pre-issuance, we're also going to look at execution risk for that project. We provide a carbon risk toolkit. We're always transparent. So basically what that means is that you can find our methodologies public on the website. You can also find our headline ratings publicly available on the website. So any project that we have rated ex post, so any project that's already issuing credits, the headline rating with that rating summary is actually available on the website. So you can go and look it up. And that is really intended to drive transparency in the market, but also create that race to the top. Right? It's like everybody can see how we've rated certain projects that are in the market or credits that are in the market today. No conflicts, so we don't buy, sell, advise, broker, or provide consultancy services for anything in the carbon market. We're truly independent and look at rating the quality of projects that are out there, and we restrict ourselves to that. Very quickly, who do we work with? So we're the market's #1 risk metric. We are now on more than 25 marketplaces and exchanges where you can find our ratings directly tagged on the platforms. We have more than 500 users on the platform. So those are really the users that look at our ex post ratings and the deeper, like more detailed project analysis write-ups. There are also ex ante ratings, which you don't find on the platform, which are confidential. And then we have something like over 4,000 subscribers that actually follow our public updates, right? So they just follow the headline ratings and the changes in there. We work with really everybody along the value chain. So we have investment banks, energy firms, marketplaces, VCM exchanges that we work with. In terms of our user base, you will find really everyone from developers to standards to intermediaries to end buyers who are retiring credits. And then how does it work? Very quickly. So basically what you see here is a classic situation of an RCM, which is a ratings committee meeting. So we have something like 70 analysts sitting in-house. They are climate scientists, they're marine biologists, they're engineers, they're biochemists, depending on the project type that they analyze, they're specialized within their sector. They work with geoscientists and data scientists to produce the analysis on the individual project. And yeah, I mean, you can see the stats, right? So basically you have an individual lead analyst that's assigned to your rating, and then they're being supported by a number of peer reviewers and a chair of the committee who will really make sure that our ratings are comparable one amongst the other and that we're creating a consistent benchmark. Rating scale. So we rate everything on an 8-point scale that works like a financial rating. So you're going from AAA, as in like this is the best possible outcome, to a D. A D means that, you know, in our estimate, there's actually no carbon value in this project, right? So what the rating is meant to suggest to you is like our opinion on the likelihood of a ton of carbon achieved, right? As in like, does this credit actually represent a ton of carbon reduced or removed? Fun fact to bear in mind, we've never actually assigned a AAA. So we're very much waiting for this community here to give us something that's worthy of a AAA. So hurry up and send that our way. And then just quickly in terms of distributions, right? Like, so the fundamental premise of providing carbon ratings is the idea that within any sector, country, and methodology, project quality varies, right? Every project is different and the risk profile of that project will be different one to the next, even within the same developer. So what you see here is a ratings distribution across different sectors. Really, so in most areas, in most sectors, you see a distribution that ranges basically from a D up to an A. In some cases, it only goes up to a triple B. The one area where we're really, really concentrated is engineered carbon removals. So you see that both those projects landed at an A, but I'm just going to say that might be sample bias because we've only rated a couple of them. So as we see more projects coming out there, I'd also expect that bar to grow in terms of the distribution. With that, I'm going to hand over to Ted, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market and a little bit about what we're seeing in removals.
Brilliant. Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, so firstly, I just want to take everyone through some of the market trends that we've been seeing sort of across the across the voluntary carbon market. And then I'm then going to talk a bit about our work in the engineered carbon removal sector in particular. So yeah, I mean, first things first, we've got some fascinating analysis that is public and on our platform, so you can sort of dig into some of this in more detail. But the first few slides just on what we're kind of seeing in the market at the moment. So this left-hand graph shows the top months for retirement in the voluntary carbon market. And I think what's really interesting here is it shows that the last month of 2023 was the highest amount of retirements on record, and actually January this year was in the sort of the top months. And then that feeds into the analysis that is in the right-hand graph that shows the historical retirements and our own projections of the retirements for this year. And so what that projection shows is we see 2024 will be a record year for the voluntary carbon market, according to these projections, and reach over $3 billion in market cap, which I think is a really promising move after a year which has been difficult for the market and with a bit of stagnation. That we're really seeing that pick up in recent months, and looking forward to the year ahead. Next is a couple of graphs on actually pricing and demand and how ratings are impacting that. So what you see here on the left-hand graph is the correlation between price and rating, so price and quality in the voluntary carbon market. So this is using data from our partnership with CBL's expansive marketplace, and it shows that really what we set out originally back in 2021, which was to fix that correlation between price and quality, is that we have gone some way into dealing with that challenge in the market. And we do have the same graph here for a year ago and 2 years ago, and you can see that graph over time steepening, really showing the material impact that ratings is having on price in the market. This right-hand graph shows the impact of ratings on demand in the past year. So this blue line shows the percentage of BeZero rated retirements that are BBB and higher, so our top 4 ratings grades. And then the orange line shows the percentage of BeZero related retirements that are BB and lower, so are the bottom 4 ratings grades. And you can see those converging towards each other and overlapping by the end of 2023. Which I think is just really exciting. It means that quality is driving demand. Ratings are driving demand in the market. And this kind of feeds into a similar point. So this graph shows the price difference between rated projects which are A and higher, so the top 3 ratings grades, and BBB or lower, so the bottom 5. And what you see is this price difference climbing to a 200% premium by the end of 2023. So it really shows that if you can get those highly rated credits, there is a huge price reward to be had across the market. Next up, I just wanted to take you through a bit about our work in the CDR space. So as an organization, we've always had a really core focus in this area. I came on board 2.5 years ago. We've had a team, growing in this space since then. Victoria and my team, she joined 2 years ago, I think, and then we've now in the last 6 to 9 months really been hiring up. We've got 2 new team members in the ratings team that are solely focused on this area, a geophysicist focused on geologic storage and a geochemist specializing in enhanced rock weathering, which I think is really exciting, that we're kind of arming up for the pursuit of this side of the market. So yeah, I mean, just reiterating, this is as Teresa said, we can rate any project, any stage, anywhere in the world, which feeds into a lot of these projects that we're talking about, what have been talked about in the This Is CDR series as well. Some of these more novel techniques that are can be more challenging to assess, and because of the beginning of last year, we built the ex-ante ratings methodology. We now have the ability to rate projects at all stages of the project lifecycle. So what you see is that the use cases really can vary. So on the developer side, there's a use case in raising investment, there's use case in raising debt financing or selling offtake. Investors, we're speaking to big tech companies, big banks about using these pre-issuance ratings to help with their own due diligence. I think it's just, as we look at the state of the market and what we see for every $1 being spent in the ex post market, we see roughly $4 being spent in the ex ante market. We now have a fully fledged product, a really market leading product that can help address that side of the market. So first, just on the ex post ratings we've done in this space, Teresa alluded to some of this, but we've done 2 biochar ratings. We're the only ratings agency to have rated. They've done full ratings for biochar for any engineered removals, and I think it's a sort of really exciting first step into this space. We have a lot more coming down the pipeline in the next few months in a number of different subsectors. But just a brief highlight of these 2 ratings that were done. So both received an A rating, which is a high likelihood of achieving a ton of CO2 equivalent removed in this case. And as you can see through that distribution we've got on the scale, these are, if you can get into those top ratings grades, it really is impactful because they are far and few between. The majority of credits are in the higher risk categories. That is the nature of the market. So getting into those top buckets is why you get to be able to drive such a price premium for those credits. And then just onto the ex-ante rating, so our pre-issuance product. I briefly just want to go over, I know Teresa talked a bit about this, but a bit about how that ratings process is. So the first step really is going through carbon risk. So there we're looking at additionality, carbon accounting, non-permanence. So within additionality, we're looking at things like common practice analysis. We'll do an evaluation of carbon finance, looking at the role of carbon credit sales in that project going ahead. There'll be a full investment analysis. There'll also be a policy environment analysis. If you've got a project which is mandated by law, obviously that's going to affect the additionality of the associated credits. Then carbon accounting, here we're looking at things like leakage and overcrediting risk, really looking for a conservative approach to credit quantification in there. And if you're looking at the case of biochar, for instance, looking at some of the leakage concerns that might come from the building of the facility, for instance, and then non-permanence risk. So the likelihood that the carbon avoided or removed by a project will remain so for the time committed, and that has looking at the natural risk of reversal, the human risk of reversal, the legal risk to reversal, looking at the evaluation of land rights, for instance. So that's really the core to the assessment, is that carbon risk. Then we'll do an information risk assessment to look for any inaccurate or unreliable information, and that will be applied as a discount factor on the carbon risk factors. And then for pre-issuance, this is the really new element we're building in here, and what we're basically doing is stripping out some of that due diligence process you get from more traditional investors, and we're plugging it really into the rating to allow us to look at those projects ahead of time. And so it's particularly important when you're looking at engineered removals, because let's just say you're looking at a direct air capture and carbon storage project, for instance. Some of that financial and technical risk, it can be very substantial for some of these projects. You're looking at enhanced rock weathering development, for instance. You need to look at the risk of operational interruption, some of the legal risk. You've got to look at the team and proponent risk involved, and so I think this is like a really interesting element that we've managed to build into the rating to allow us to have this product in the space. And then what is the outcome of that? We have this is essentially a 100+ page scientific due diligence doc. The difference we have from the kind of consultancy based reports is really what the ratings report does is it allows us to the credit to then have the impact in the market. So it steers demand and price, as we've already gone through, due to that fungibility of the headline rating across the market. And I do think it's genuinely a market leading product with an unparalleled team of scientists focused on this sector. I think it's been really exciting to see the team grow out under Teresa in her remit over the last sort of 6 to 9 months, and really excited to the year ahead of rolling more of these out. Lastly, I just want to go through a couple of research projects, sort of R&D pieces of work that we've done over the last year as well. So the first is our scalability assessment for carbon removal. So last year, just over a year ago, we published this. It's a comparative assessment of the barriers to scaling for different engineered carbon removal methods. We looked at direct air capture, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, biochar, enhanced rock weathering, and ocean alkalinity enhancement. And it was done on a method level, and it was really kind of research exercise initially, but provided initially as a private assessment to our users who wanted to understand this subsector of the market. And by and large, we found that all of the different solutions we looked at had varied and very varied barriers. And I think that there was biochar actually was consistently sort of had fewer barriers in a number of these categories. We put a lot of that down to in the end was to just the level of technology readiness level that is at compared to some of its competitors. And then towards the end of last year, I think about September, we published this was our durability assessment for carbon removal. It was sort of the sequel to the scalability assessment, and looked at the theoretical physical carbon storage duration of the carbon, risks of reversal, and scientific certainty. It was done using an in-depth literature review, and this is kind of this graph here just shows from a very top level what some of those outcomes were. So you can see that that geologic injection, carbon in concrete, and in situ mineralization had in that sort of the top category of durability, where they had the highest scientific certainty alongside the very minor risks of reversal. And I think that's it from us from a presentation perspective. Thanks very much for taking the time to listen, and I'll pass back over to Toby for some questions.
That's great. Thank you very much to you both. That was very informative and well presented. I have a bunch of questions. We've gotten some great questions from the audience. Please keep those coming in, and we'll get to as many of those as possible in a few minutes. For folks that aren't familiar, can you talk a little bit, just to start, like, this isn't a new idea that you invented for carbon removal. Can you talk about how ratings have been applied in other sectors? Obviously financial markets, I don't know if there are other sectors, but maybe just like give a couple examples of how ratings in other industries work or have been applied.
Yeah, so you're completely right. Our founders came from financial markets, and so they saw this being applied in different industries. I think a good one to think about is the fixed income market, so the bond market, and so the ratings really, tell the market what the likelihood of default is in that example. And we actually did a report with Kita last year discussing some of this, and what we saw as the kind of foundations to integrity in the market were ratings, insurance, and MRV. And so in the bond market, it was ratings, insurance, and accounting and auditing, basically. And what those tools have helped the bond market scale to $123 trillion market. It is one of the largest markets in the world, and those risk layers help build confidence and basically unlock buyer demand. And so that is where I think there's some really interesting parallels with the carbon credit market, and that is why we're using these tools to hopefully help scale it.
And I will also say that I think that the application of ratings to fixed income markets and other financial markets have not historically been without problem and scandal. What do you and your founders and Teresa, like, what do you feel like can be learned from, past problems in other markets in terms of building a solid foundation for the application of ratings in the CDR market, which we do have the benefit, we have the both deficit and benefit of building it from the ground up at this point.
Yeah, I'll have to say that. Yeah, I mean, from our side, I think like disclosure and transparency has always been so integral to our model. We've pushed the market in many, many ways to try and be more transparent, and we think that is the solution to a lot of these issues, is that you can actually build confidence and trust by having that transparency. So we've had our headline ratings now public for 2 years, only ratings agency that does that. We also have published our our carbon accounting template, which we've pushed other players in the market to adopt to try and make sure we have that consistent integrity of what is being disclosed. So I think that is really crucial to making sure we don't repeat any of those mistakes.
And can you talk about in antecedent markets like fixed income or other financial markets, who pays for the ratings? Like, is it always the seller? Does the buyer pay? Does it vary? Because the incentives are obviously very important as well when we think about these things, but would love to hear, like, and my follow-up question will be who pays in CDR, but like, and talk about how it's worked historically and in terms of incentive alignment and who's paying.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in the history of the bond market, but yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it's an issuer pays model in sort of more traditional markets. In terms of the question on CDR, basically anyone can pay for a rating. The way we manage it is that any rating that is being paid for has to have all of the payment up front before any of the analytical process starts. So that's the way you can navigate around it. It means that anyone that is paying for the rating doesn't have that issue of conflict because the payment is done up front and then it is delivered subsequently.
Got it. And Teresa, you were nodding your head. Do you have any other comments or thoughts on that or any of these other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard from Ted, right? So like, I think both in financial ratings and in carbon ratings, I think what's parallel there is like, you can have an investor pays or an issuer pays model, right? As in like either side could have paid. I think what we're seeing more and more is like, you often get more publicly available information, ratings, transparency if you have an issuer pays model, right? So like where the investor pays, it's often confidential, which is similar to what we're seeing in carbon ratings, right? So like often what we're now seeing is actually that it could be the developer who approaches us for an ex-ante rating because it's very useful for them to rejig their project design. But actually what's starting to happen more and more is that it's not the developer approaching us, it's actually the investor approaching us, right? So they're starting to make ratings part of their due diligence process when they look at investable projects, right? They require a rating in many cases. In some cases, the investor pays for it because they're already invested in the project and they want to know where the money is going. So it's sort of like a mixed, we're seeing sort of mixed distribution of where the demand is coming from. But obviously, I think the hope is, and we can talk about this more, right? But like the hope is obviously that over time, we're going to see a correlation where higher ratings, higher pre-issuance ratings would actually drive down the cost of capital, right? As in like, can we get to a point where this is actually so relevant for investor due diligence that it improves access to capital for carbon developers?
Got it. That actually is a good segue into my next question, because I do some, and I'm not working on OpenAir, I do some work on the supply side of the CDR sector. And, in the abstract, sure, quality, everyone understands the importance of quality. Ratings sound good, but if you're a CDR developer or supplier, things are so expensive right now in terms of actual scaling up, physical scale up, and for small novel projects. And there's definitely a feeling out there like, oh wow, is this another thing I have to pay for? Is it gonna like pay off for me? Like, how will I be compensated for this investment I have to make in ratings or insurance? Or there are a number of other products that I think are being, that are manifesting that are, I won't say push, but like that are being marketed to the supply side of the CDR sector. Can you talk about, like, when you talk to developers, like how do you say, yep, this is going to be another expense you have, but it's going to pay off? Like, can you talk about the value proposition for the supply side? And I think a lot of the value proposition too is, maybe Frontier doesn't care about this per se because they're doing their own diligence, but I think it's in terms of how the market scales. I think that might be an important view.
Yeah, why do it, right? So it's one more thing on top of your project development, your issuance, your verification costs. So I think there's multiple why do it's, right? So like one Ted talked about, and he showed you the numbers a little bit, it's that there's a price premium for the credits later on in the market if there's a rating attached to it. It's something like 20% notch by notch, right? So like for every rung you climb on the ratings ladder, you can expect to see a 20% price premium on average. Once you hit that A bucket though, right? So like once you get into the AA, AAAs, it's something like a 200% price premium on credits that are being sold today, right? And like this doesn't even include engineered removals because we didn't have engineered removals being traded when we did the analysis. So that's an important thing to bear in mind, is like the benefit might come later on. The other benefit I already spoke about is the cost of capital, right? So like ex-ante ratings are too new for us to actually crunch the numbers, right? As in like we've only had the product in the market for about 6 months, and we've done 20 with probably another 10, 20 in the pipeline. But what we're hoping to be able to do by the end of the year is actually show you the correlation between cost of capital and like higher pre-issuance ratings, and to start showing the trend of like investors actually asking to see these ratings as part of their DD. I think the other point that I would like to make, and like I think that's an important one, even though it doesn't like benefit the individual developer directly, right? But it's buyer confidence. And I think that that's something that's been really, really holding back the market, is this constant churn of media stories that takes down credit type after credit type after credit type, right? And CDR has been relatively unaffected by that so far, but I think overall what we're seeing is that the carbon market, as in like voluntary offsets, are not taking off the way that we want them to take off, because there's so much concern over credit quality. So I think the more we can start allaying these concerns by creating transparency and showing buyers what good looks like and making them feel confident about coming back to the market, the better for all of us, right? As in like, can we start showing a few like AAA rated projects? I actually think that that would make a huge difference to the market overall.
Got it. Any additional thoughts, Ted, or Teresa covered it pretty well? Give you a chance. So the ex ante versus ex post. So is ex ante typically or exclusively going to be paid for by the supplier, and will ex post typically be paid for by the investor, or is that oversimplification?
Yeah, I'd say there's no. I mean, it's for both. It can be both. For either ex ante or ex post, anyone, it's still the same rule applies. Anyone can request and pay for a rating.
Okay. And you've seen both in both cases.
Yeah.
And with an ex ante, you talked about how it can like have a positive feedback into to create a lower cost of capital. Would that be for future projects, or if you're getting because like you can't really get an ex ante rating until you have the project?
Yeah, exactly. So the nature of the rating is it is purely for projects which are yet to become operational. So yeah, what we're looking at is a number of projects I'm speaking to in the engineered carbon removal space, both the investors and the developers involved, where they're trying to get to that crucial kind of bankability stage where they can raise debt financing. And in traditional markets, you usually have a project finance rating from Moody's or S&P. But as you're trying to look at, let's say, a direct air capture project or a bioenergy carbon capture and storage project, a lot of these things are very challenging for those more traditional financial ratings agencies to do. So that's where we can help step in, and that's where I think in the long run it becomes a really interesting and exciting prospect that we can help bridge that divide to bankability for some of these projects.
Got it. And do you and BeZero have a view on the recently issued guidance from SBTI on beyond value chain mitigation? And does that, like whether it's a compensation claim or a contribution claim, does that have any impact on the role of ratings, or do you feel like ratings have the same part to play in either scenario?
Maybe to Teresa, she's the queen of the voluntary regulations, I think.
my wheelhouse. So super excited to see the SBTI come out with beyond value chain. Right, like this has been in the making since, I can't tell you how long. I definitely had conversations about this 5-6 years ago. So I'm super excited that it's out. I'm super excited that the SBTI is finally saying that, carbon credits are a good thing and you should use them to accelerate the transition, right? Like that's something we've needed to hear, because I think the net zero guidance was fairly ambivalent on that. That said, it's probably a little late and not quite enough. right? As in, like, it would have been nice to be much, much stronger in my mind to really put out that narrative of like, while you are in transition, right? So like while any corporate or any producing business is reducing their emissions, they absolutely should be offsetting them because we can't afford to increase atmospheric concentration of CO2. Right? As in, like, we should be offsetting right now to accelerate the transition, pay for emission reductions elsewhere. And like, I don't think that that was as clear in the guidance as I would have liked it to be. And again, right, like so many pieces of guidance out there. You know, you have the GHGP, you have the SBTI, you have the BVCM, you have the VCMI, which I'm a huge fan of. You have the ICVCM, right? But like, I think that the acronym jungle is it's overwhelming, right? And it's not super aligned, and there's great efforts underway to align these different pieces a bit more. But you know, I think at this point, policymakers are probably moving faster than the voluntary initiatives, and that should give us pause.
Yeah. I can personally testify to the confusing nature of the acronym soup, having tried to read GHG protocol this morning. It's definitely
and they have so many protocols, right? Scope 1, 2, 3.
I might have to ask you a question later. So policy, like, so I want to talk about how does the role of ratings change in a compliance versus voluntary market scenario? And that's a little forward looking, but like, how do you see what's happening now? I think carrot policy is more advanced in the US, and then sort of more of the quote unquote stick policy is more advanced in the EU. Can you talk about like how, like, what are you seeing in terms of policy, and not to be exclusive to those two geographies, but maybe I think they offer good examples and different examples, but like, what are you seeing now in terms of US and EU policy, and how does it relate to your business? Like, do you feel like good things are happening? Are you concerned? Would love to like get a sense of that. In either market, if you want to just EU, that would be great too. However you want to look at it.
Yeah. Are good things happening? I mean, there's good things happening, and there's fairly concerning things happening, I think, in both markets. These are great areas to focus on because they have regulation, right? Like many other parts of the world we operate in just don't have consistent regulation. So these are good areas to focus on. I think like primarily like the point that's important to mention is that there's, like, in my mind, there's three pieces of the market that you can regulate, but they're very different pieces of the puzzle, right? So like you can look at credit quality, right? As in, like, that's a little bit what the CCPs are trying to do, and they're probably going to get mainstreamed into policy in some places, which is like, what does a good credit look like? And that's also where you would want to place ratings, right? Like, can we mandate ratings within compliance markets, for example? You can look at the transaction, right? As in, like, how do credits get traded? How do markets get created? What's the transparency? What's the barrier to entry within the market? And then you can look at claims, right? And like, I think like claims and disclosure of corporate emissions is where we're seeing the most traction or the most movement at the moment, not least with the SEC regulation coming out. Which is really, really interesting, right? Because like the one thing that we do know about mandating disclosure is that it does two things, right? So like companies that have to disclose their emissions will actually decarbonize faster, on the one hand because of public pressure, but on the other hand, just because they've actually had to look at where they emit and probably found some operational inefficiencies. And the other thing we know about these companies is that they tend to offset more. Right. So like if you've already gone through the entire exercise of measuring your footprint, understanding your value chain, reporting that back to your board, trying to figure out where you can most cost effectively allocate your sustainability budget, you're probably going to allocate some of that to reductions and some of that to compensation. So overall, I'd say, in both markets, really good progress on the disclosure side, which makes me very happy for the climate, even though, like, let's recognize it's also a burden, right? Like, somebody needs to implement this. We don't have good measurement. We don't have good tracking. We don't have good data availability. So these are all sort of like capacities that we need to build out. I was just chatting with my sister who's in like health products, and she's like, how the hell am I going to measure the carbon content of the packaging of this health product? And I was just like, don't worry. Everybody else is asking themselves the same question, right? As in, like, in many of these cases, we don't really have the answer, and we're going to have to figure it out. And overall, it's going to be a good process for the climate, but very, very burdensome for the companies involved.
And you referenced compliance markets briefly. How are ratings currently applied to the EU ETS? And I'm like, I think the program focuses on CDR, so I'd love to kind of get to that. And but are ratings currently incorporated into ETS? And does that inform a future incorporation of ratings into however EU and other jurisdictions decide to incorporate CDR into compliance markets, whether incorporating it into an existing emissions trading scheme or a separate negative emissions trading system scheme?
Yeah. So short answer is no. There's no carbon ratings in the EU ETS. But also there should be. Right. So like, I mean, broadly speaking, if you think about compliance schemes, there's different ways of using ratings in compliance schemes. So one is just to like create transparency, right? Isn't like the regulator can mandate the use of ratings. So it becomes more obvious what the quality of the emission allowance, the emission reduction, or the credit in the system is, right? So that is sort of like the, a rising tide raises all boats, is that idea of like we can create a race to the top simply by making information available, and then capital will automatically flow into higher quality solutions, which is partly true when there's a willingness to pay for these higher quality solutions or they're not particularly expensive. You could also use ratings as a cutoff, right? And like any given regulator, for example, could say we're not under Article 6 going to purchase units that are C or D rated, or they could say we're not going to allow any credits into our domestic market that are C or D rated. So that's another use case. And we are starting to get, we're starting to get more and more countries knocking on the door, both on the buy side and the supply side for Article 6 credits, right? So like on the buy side, countries are very much concerned about what is it that they're importing in terms of that emission reduction. Like, is that actually a credible emission reduction, or is it hot air credit? And then on the sell side, countries are very interested in trying to understand, what kind of potential do they have within their area, and should they be using that for domestic NDC achievement, or should they be selling it off and at what prices? So that is happening. I think the only other point that I would point to is like the Australian market, which is an extremely interesting unicorn, because in the Australian market, you're actually required to disclose what you retire. So that's had the interesting side effect that we now, without the regulator being involved, we now have private sector actors who are actually coming our way who want ratings because there is such pressure to disclose. So like, again, like you can mandate the rating, or you can just mandate transparency and the rating will come.
Got it. I think the idea of like delivering more compliance benefit to the higher rated projects that's kind of interesting too. And like, as opposed to a cutoff, which would allow B and A credits to sort of get the same value. Interesting. Well, thank you so much for that. And ask questions all day, but we have a bunch of great audience questions, and Mega's going to come on and start peppering you with a few of those. So thank you so much.
Yeah, great. So I think maybe you touched on this one, but it would just be great to know, like, what materials or what documentation do you actually review to conduct the analysis of the rating? And this person asked about digital MRV, but I would also love to know, like, how that differs between different types of carbon removal that you would be assessing.
Yeah. So generally it's an evolving space, right? So like we've rated something like 400 ex post credits. So it's pretty clear what we look at there, right? It's like carbon accounting, issuance forecast, project boundaries, and so on. Slightly harder to define in the ex ante space because the projects are in such different stages of development. But we are sort of working out like what's the minimum required, right? So we're going to need, like, at a minimum, we're going to need a project description. We're going to need an understanding of the activity implemented, how it's going to be financed, what the legal barriers are in the place that you're operating, and then really anything that you can supply on carbon accounting and additionality, right? So say anything we can, which in the engineered removal space should be fairly straightforward, but what can we say about the additionality of this project given the use of carbon finance? And then, yeah, I mean, really anything that we can look at to forecast issuance and reproduce the carbon accounting, which in some projects is like really well advanced because they're already on the registry and we know. In some projects, we're basically doing it with the developer almost. But yeah, then to your question of like, do we want your DMRV data? We would love your DMRV data if that is available, right? So like the more granular, the better, the more accurate the rating is going to be.
Yeah, okay. And then another question related to that. So how, if, as a project kind of goes from ex ante, not really built yet, all the way down to ex post, how does that evolve with your ratings? Is it kind of the same rating evolving over time? Do you sort of start from scratch every time? How does that evolve?
Yeah, so there's so the only analytical difference between an ex ante and an ex post is execution risk, right? So we'll be providing you with a score on execution risk while your project is not yet issuing.
Yeah.
And there is an update to that, right? So there's a maintenance clause, as in like we will update the rating over time if it's an ex ante rating. At some point, hopefully, if all goes well, that project starts issuing and turns into what we would call an ex post rating. At that point, we need to reassess our own, because we're basically giving you a predictive rating, right? Of like, how likely do we think that this project is to issue XYZ in the future? So we'll go back in, run a quick, run basically like actual issuance, like what actually happened on the ground against our predictions, reconfirm the rating, and put that on the platform. If there's demand for it to be on the platform, right? So we will need to reconfirm the rating when it moves into ex post.
Okay, got it. And yeah, for CDR projects, I guess where, the technology could be quite novel, or there could be aspects about it that are just uncertain to begin with, but then once someone has started to deliver, or just at various stages, there could be different proof points that keep coming up. Is that something that also gets sort of bundled into the rating, or is that part of execution risk if it's a bit of an unknown technology? How do you think about that?
Yeah, Ted, I don't know if you want to pick that up.
Yes, once the removal has happened and it's an issued credit, obviously the execution risk is not relevant. And so it's probably worth just feeding back to what the rating actually is, and it's our opinion of a ton of CO2 equivalent being removed or avoided. And so when it's ex post, how novel the technology is and how how new the team are, it's just not really relevant, because like the activities happen, so we're judging that carbon efficacy. But it's definitely a very big part of the project execution risk for pre-issuance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So pre-issuance, you can look at operational, technical, financial, and legal risk. If it's something that's never been done before, there's multiple unknowns, right? As in is technology going to work? Is the business model going to work? But also social acceptance is a huge topic for the removal space, right? As in will this take off, or will you have some pushback there? So that's basically what we factor in execution risk. Because it doesn't affect, well, in some cases might, but primarily it's not going to affect your carbon accounting, right? But it affects the success of the actual business that you're running on the ground.
Yeah. Okay. And is there an element, when you say your certainty that this has occurred, is it I'm 90% sure it's happened, or is there an element of, I think 90% of a ton was removed? Do you are those combined into what you consider as your rating?
Yeah, it's the likelihood of a ton removed or reduced, right? So in all these cases, it's predictive, right? As in you've run your model, we've run our model, we've run a dynamic baseline. If you're in the nature space, we've double checked all the accounting. We've looked at independent reports, we've looked at the literature, we've reassessed whether you've taken the most up-to-date values, the most project and regionally specific. And then we say, it is likely, here's how likely it is that this is going to be a real ton removed, right?
Okay. Yeah, okay. And I think this is a good question that we got as well. So how do those methods differ for removals, which is, I think, what most people here are most familiar with, versus the abatement space? And as an example, they say removals can often easily measure the CO2 volumes, but then upstream LCAs are complicated if you have biomass supply chains, or, the DAC versus point source boundary. How do you where do you set those boundaries?
Look, even within removals, you named a few there that have wildly different methods, and so they've all got their own sort of nuances and challenges. If you're looking at a direct air capture project, the carbon accounting is often extremely basic. It's very easy. If you're looking at enhanced rock weathering project, it's far from that. So it's very hard to lump them all together. I think they've all got independent challenges and different risks that are sort of often higher in different subsectors, as it corresponds to the avoidance and emissions reduction space. I'd say often, this is by no means true for all of them, but often additionality and a non-permanence risk is very low for some of these more durable carbon removal solutions. And it's not always the case that is the case in avoidance and emissions reduction. So yeah, it's very project specific is the boring answer, and it varies a lot between different types.
Okay, great. Just one last one before I let you go. So what are your thoughts regarding the recent climate risk disclosure rules issued by the US SEC? And more broadly, what government policies are needed to address the issues that you're starting to see in this space?
Yeah, that's a Teresa.
Regulation comes my way. What did I think about the SEC? I mean, I've already said, right? There's sort of like, you can regulate the quality, you can regulate the market, you can regulate the claims. Like all of these are important pieces. We need all of them to make the market grow. I think the SEC, like I'm a huge fan of disclosure, right? I've said it because I think it actually drives ambition across the market in terms of reductions and the use of credits, which is what we care about here. I'm personally, like, I fully understand why this happened. I think I was personally like, I was still kind of hoping that they would include scope 3. And like, I fully recognize none of us actually know how to measure scope 3. We have no idea, but I think that is fundamentally what would have made the carbon market grow, right? Like if you actually had to look at your value chain emissions and then come up with a plan to reduce either inset or offset within your value chain. I think that would have been great. I fully recognize why it didn't happen, right? Nobody knows how to measure it. Nobody knows how to account for it. There's zero databases out there. The burden would have been huge. But in my mind, that's the only route I see to really A, make the market grow, but B, make a dent on the climate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been really good to have you, and nice to have like a different perspective from the carbon removal companies we often get on here. So thanks so much. And yeah, Toby, back to you.
Cool. Thank you, Mega. And thank you to the audience for the great questions and for being with us. And especially thank you to Teresa and Ted for sharing your time with us and your expertise. I personally learned a lot and really enjoyed the program. So thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mega.
Just very briefly before we close, I'm just going to share screen and just walk through what's coming up. So thanks again to Teresa and Ted for being with us today. We have a couple announced This Is CDRs that are on the calendar, and I put a link to the Luma page where you can register for these, and also a link to our YouTube page, I believe, where you can watch all past episodes. And this one will be posted later this week. 2 weeks from now, we have a really interesting one, Plant Village Plus, which is Professor David Hughes from Penn State University. He has led a team that is an X Prize milestone awardee and an X Prize finalist, and they're doing distributed biochar with smallholder farmers in the Global South, sort of similar conceptually to Mati Earth, which we had doing on the program a while ago, doing enhanced weathering with smallholder farmers in India. So super excited for that one. And David is also going to advocate for biochar as a gigaton plus scale solution. So he's a very he's a strong advocate for biochar. So that will be good. And then a couple weeks after that, actually the next week after that, we have a novel terrestrial biomass sequestration company called Graphite that has a plant being built in Arkansas that's already starting to deliver CDR. So excited about both of those, and we have a few more episodes to announce shortly. But for now, we will close and thank again Teresa and Ted for being with us, and thank you to the audience for joining us. More soon. Everyone take care. Bye.